The story of Ruth and Naomi, a lesson in loyalty, kindness, and faith. The book of Ruth in the Bible is a heartwarming story that highlights the power of loyalty, love, kindness, and faith. It centers around Ruth, a young woman from Moab, and her journey with her mother-in-law, Naomi. A key part of Ruth's story involves a man named Boaz, who plays a significant role in their lives. This story is cherished for its deep meaning and the powerful lessons it teaches. Let's dive into the full story and see what we can learn from Ruth and Boaz's example and how we can apply it to our lives. The background: Ruth and Naomi's journey. Naomi was a woman from Bethlehem in Judah, who had moved to the land of Moab with her husband and 2 sons because there was no food in their homeland. Sadly, Naomi's husband died, leaving her with her 2 sons. These sons married women from Moab, one of them being Ruth. After about 10 years, both of Naomi's sons died, leaving Naomi, Ruth, and the other daughter-in-law, Orpah, as widows, with no one left to take care of her. Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem because she had heard that there was food there again. She told her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab, where they could find husbands and start new lives. At first, both Ruth and Orpah wanted to go with Naomi, but after Naomi insisted, Orpah decided to stay in Moab. However, Ruth made a different, surprising choice that changed her life forever. Ruth's promise to Naomi. When Naomi told Ruth to go back to her own people and her gods, Ruth responded with a powerful declaration of loyalty and faith. Ruth said, "Don't ask me to leave you or to turn away from you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and I will be buried there with you. May the Lord punish me severely if anything but death separates us." Ruth 1 verses 16 to 17. This promise is one of the most beautiful expressions of loyalty and love found in the Bible. Ruth was not only choosing to stay with Naomi, but she was also committing to adopt Naomi's people and her God as her own. Ruth's words showed that her loyalty to Naomi was so strong that not even death would separate them. When Naomi realized how serious Ruth was, she stopped trying to convince her to stay behind. The 2 women then traveled together to Bethlehem, where Ruth's story would continue to unfold in remarkable ways. The meeting of Ruth and Boaz. When Ruth and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, they had very little. Ruth decided to go into the fields to gather leftover grain so they could have something to eat. In those days, it was common for poor people to follow behind harvesters and pick up any grain that was left behind. Ruth happened to go to a field that belonged to a man named Boaz. Boaz was a kind and wealthy man, and he noticed Ruth working in his fields. He asked his workers about her and learned that she was the Moabite woman who had come back with Naomi. Boaz was impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her hard work. He spoke kindly to Ruth and told her to stay in his fields, where she would be safe and could gather as much grain as she needed. Boaz also made sure that Ruth had plenty of food and water while she worked. When Ruth asked Boaz why he was being so kind to her, he replied, "I've heard all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth 2 verses 11 to 1. Ruth was deeply touched by Boaz's kindness and continued to work in his fields throughout the harvest season. Each day, she gathered a large amount of grain to take home to Naomi. After working hard in the fields, Ruth would return home to Naomi with the grain she had gathered. On the first day, Ruth brought back an entire ephah of barley, which is a large amount, enough to feed them for many days. She also shared with Naomi the leftover food that Boaz had given her during the day. When Naomi saw the grain, she was amazed and asked Ruth where she had worked. Ruth told Naomi all about Boaz and how kind he had been to her. Naomi recognized that Boaz was a relative and could act as their kinsman redeemer. Naomi said, "May the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." Ruth 2 verse 20. Naomi then advised Ruth to continue working in Boaz's fields because she knew that Boaz would take care of her. Boaz becomes Ruth's redeemer. In those days, a kinsman redeemer was a close relative who had the right to redeem, or buy back, the property of a deceased relative to keep it within the family. The kinsman redeemer could also marry the widow to carry on the family name. Naomi instructed Ruth to approach Boaz and let him know that he could be their kinsman redeemer. Ruth followed Naomi's advice and went to Boaz at night, laying at his feet as a sign of her request for protection and redemption. Boaz was moved by Ruth's request and her loyalty to Naomi. He agreed to become their redeemer, but explained that there was another man who was a closer relative and had the first right to redeem. Boaz promised to resolve the matter quickly. The next day, Boaz met with the other relative in front of the town elders and explained the situation. The other man declined to redeem the land and marry Ruth, so Boaz fulfilled his promise and became Ruth's kinsman redeemer. He married Ruth, and together they had a son named Obed. Obed would later become the grandfather of King David, making Ruth an ancestor of Jesus Christ. What we learn from Ruth and Boaz's story. The story of Ruth and Boaz teaches us several important lessons. Loyalty and commitment. Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her commitment to her new life in Bethlehem shows us the importance of standing by those we love, even when it's difficult. Boaz to Ruth demonstrates the power of treating others with generosity and compassion, even when someone is a stranger or comes from a different background. Kindness can make a huge difference in their lives. Faith in God's plan. Both Ruth and Boaz trusted in God's plan for their lives. Even when they didn't know what the future held, their faith led to blessings beyond what they could have imagined. The importance of family. The story highlights the value of family and the responsibility we have to care for one another. Boaz's role as a kinsman redeemer shows how family members can support and protect each other in times of need. God's providence. The story of Ruth and Boaz reminds us that God's hand is at work in our lives, guiding us and providing for us, even when we don't see it. How we can apply these lessons today. Be loyal in our relationships. Let's strive to be as loyal as Ruth, whether it's with family, friends, or our faith. Loyalty means standing by those we care about, even in tough times. Show kindness, like Boaz. We can show kindness and generosity to others, especially those who are in need. Small acts of kindness can have a big impact. Trust in God's plan. When we face uncertainty, we can have faith that God has a plan for us. Trusting in this plan can give us peace and hope. Value family. Family is important, and we should do our best to support and care for our loved ones, just as Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz did. Recognize God's providence, even when we don't see it. God is working in our lives. By staying faithful and open to His guidance, we can experience the blessings He has in store for us. Conclusion. The story of Ruth and Boaz is a timeless example of loyalty, kindness, and faith. Ruth's promise to Naomi, Boaz's kindness to Ruth, and their trust in God's plan all serve as powerful reminders of how we should live our lives. By applying the lessons from Ruth and Boaz's story in our own lives, we can build stronger relationships, face challenges with faith, and experience the deep satisfaction that comes from living with purpose and heart. Ruth and Boaz's story is not just an ancient story, it's a guide for how we can live with love, loyalty, and trust in God today.